Hi guys, in today's session I'll be taking you through unit standard 14919, and the titles for this unit standard is resolve computer user problems. So this unit standard consists of 5 sessions, and in this session I'll be taking you through all the sessions from session 1 up until session 5. So let's look at the outcomes for this unit standard. At the end of this unit standard, you'll be able to receive computer user problem. That's for session 1. So in this session, that's where we'll identify the problems, having needing to understand the identifying the problems and the parameters of the types of problems that you encounter. And also in session 2, we will be investigating further the computer problems. This is where your mitigating steps, your troubleshooting steps that will go hand in hand in terms of how can we solve the problem. And in session 3, I'll be implementing the solutions that you have come up with in terms of the mitigating steps that you came up on session 2. So in session 3, that's where we'll go in depth in terms of how to implement the solution to the computer user problems. And in session 4, this is how can we close off the resolve computer user problem. So it differs uh, from organization to organization, and the methodology that most organizations use, so it will be different. So in session 4, I'll go into details in terms of can you go about in terms of closing the resolve computer user problems. And in the last session, which is session 5, uh, this is more of how to forward unresolved computer user problems. And also in this session, similar to session 4, it depends based on the extent of the problem itself, um, and the methodology that most organization uses, and how can you go about in terms of forwarding or escalating the unresolved computer user problems. So let's look into the first session on the next slide, which is session 1, how to receive computer problems. So uh, the first thing is we've got the stages that we need to go about. The first thing, whenever we encounter a problem, we need to define in order for us to understand. So the first thing is we need to define the problem, and we need to identify the problem type, whether this problem type is something that is hardware related or software related. It depends on the problem that you have encountered. Maybe the laptop is not switching off or switching on, sorry. So you need to identify what type of problem is it. Is it software or hardware related? And also we need to make sure that the facts you have collected meet the problems in terms of the investigations, the information in terms of how or what could be the problem in terms of the laptop not switching on. And lastly, we need to determine the possible actions to take in order for us to solve the problem. So let's look at the first item, which is the defining the problem. Defining a problem and every problem solving methodology, the first step is defining or identifying the problem. So it is the most difficult and the most important of all the steps. Again, why is it difficult? It depends in terms of the problem that is at hand. So if it's hardware related, maybe some hardware needs to be replaced, and sometimes it might be difficult in order for you to determine or defining the solutions in terms of getting the solution to that problem. And also it involves diagnosing the situation, so that the focus on the real problem and not on its symptoms. So let's look at an example below. In this situation, we've got an audio issue. So this is just a descript in terms of the audio issue. So in most virtual meetings that we have accustomed to lately have become standard these days, and so have a host of audio issues that can make using your PC unbearable. So in this instance, especially with online training, we may find or online meetings, utilizing different types of platforms like your Zoom, your Teams. You may find that employees or clients may utilize these platforms, but they may have audio issues. So looking at this in terms of defining the problem, one PC might or one laptop might encounter such issues where audio it's not audible. One of the issues might be defining the problem that a certain client cannot access or utilize Zoom, for instance, and we need to find solutions. So that's more of defining. So looking at the problem type for that, so microphones can get accidentally muted. It happens in most cases, or audio sources can switch within different programs. So in this instance, be based on the type of laptops that we use, these things might accidentally be muted. The settings or sources, for instance, whenever you utilize Zoom, for instance, automatically there's a pop-up message that you would receive in terms of utilizing the type of audios that you may use. So not understanding the platform itself, you might accidentally select an unused mute, so that also can cause the problems. So that is more of the problem type. Also a hardware failure, which is uncommon, but in this instance, precisely, chances are that probability of that happening, it's almost 1%. Hardware failure can be maybe your drivers are mistakenly deleted, or they are not up to date, that you need to update your audio hard drivers. More often, sound issues can be resolved within the operating system. That's where you have to update your app drivers, and there are multiple ways to access and change sound settings. So troubleshooting issues can be frustrating when waiting for a virtual meeting or a video to call. This is true in most cases. So in most instances, you may find that you know having to update those drivers whilst waiting to log in, or you know to access the meeting that your client is supposed to be in. So those are the issues, in terms of determining the problem type. And also the parameters on the next slide. When you define a problem, you also need to identify its parameters. So parameters are fixed limits that control the way in which you need to do something. So before you solve a problem, you need to collect the information you need to start thinking of solutions. So in an example that I've provided on the previous slide, the information in terms of how can you solve that problem might be if it's hardware or software related. So if it's hardware, update the drivers. If it's software, it could be the application itself. You know, there are certain settings that you need to do on the application, and where you can test. So always I encourage people who are to access online training, that just give yourself 30 minutes before, prior to your meeting, you know to at least test the peripherals or the components that you'll be utilizing for your Zoom. That also allows you to test, if maybe you detect any issues with your audios. That's where you can get assistance quickly. And also, when you identify the problem parameters, you collect information about what would be prepared to do to solve the problem. And then when you identify possible causes of the problem, you collect information about where the problem came from in the first place. So it's easier, when you think about or collecting information and having the possible causes of the problem in terms of where could that problem come from in the first place. So since you have managed to test and you have discovered that most of the application, when you do the settings, whenever you utilize Zoom for instance, the pop-up when you take about maybe a few minutes not choosing the correct option, by default it puts you off. It doesn't give you the option to choose which audio you're using, so by default it will mute you off. So those are the things that you can discover and understand where that problem comes from. So once you've collected information about the problem, the next step is to make sure that the information meets the requirements. By meeting the requirements is how you go into identifying the information and also solving the problem. So that should meet the requirements in terms of how will you mitigate those steps in order for you to solve the problem. And also this means that the information you have collected needs to be able to help you to solve the problem, as I've just mentioned. And also in the previous example that I've provided, the problem parameters for the example about the audio issues could be the volume is low or muted from the operating system. As I've said, if it's software related, you may find that within the operating system, in this instance, utilizing the Zoom for instance, the application itself, it could be muted. If it's hardware related, the drivers needs to be updated, and that takes time, because now remember, when you about to download the drivers, it has to download on the internet, and then it needs to locate for that certain type of a vendor or that type of product that you are utilizing. So those are some of the issues. And also it could be hardware issue if the PC generic audio driver isn't working or isn't compatible with some of the features of the headphones. So those are some of the type of parameters that you may find based on the previous example that I've provided. Also, when determining a cause of an action, these are one of the steps in terms of defining a problem. Once you have identified the problem type and parameters and thought about some possible causes, you need to start thinking about what to do to solve the problem. So the things you need to do to solve a problem are called course of action. In this step, you do not actually start taking action yet. You start from the ideas about what are you going to do to solve the problem. So this it's a step where you have to brainstorm in terms of how you are going to solve the problem based on the mitigating steps that you've managed to come about with, or the troubleshooting steps. Also, we have the evaluation solutions. Before solutions can be implemented, it is important to make sure that it properly satisfies the problem and that it does so efficiently. So this is done through evaluation. So evaluation allows us to consider the solution to a problem, make sure that it meets the original design criteria, and also it produces the correct solution. It also fits for purpose before implementing begins. So solutions, it's more having solutions based on the problem that you have managed to define, and again understanding, come up with the causes of action. So now, based on the causes of action, you might have about 5 or 6 steps in order for you to solve that problem. So now, once you evaluate the solution, you may find the best fit solution in order for you to solve the problem that is at hand. And also, in terms of the common PC problems that we encounter on a day-to-day basis, every PC has a computer problem now and then. Even the most stable, secure machine is not safe from a buggy software, failing hardware, or even occasional loose wire. So PC problems can be a huge headache, bringing productivity to a halt and potentially costing you money. So we've got some of the most common computer problems and their causes. So on the next slide, we have what we call the insufficient memory, which is the type of common PCs that we have. So in this problems or common PC problems, the processor programs also demand a lot of memory. Like for instance, like your word processor, they also demand memory. So random access memory aids the central processing unit by storing instructions linked to common operations. So without enough RAM, software crashes and slowdowns can occur. So in most instances, like for instance, let me just pull out something that might give us okay. So this I wanted to okay, let's look at the task manager for instance. So in this instance, we can check the most utilized memory. For instance, as you can see, it uses about this AppleSoft free screen recorder. As I'm utilizing it, it uses about 116 MB. That's like about 50% in total that's being utilized by memory. So also Excel, it uses about 3. So this is the highest. So it takes about 38%, of CPU that is being utilized. So this is how you go about, in terms of, software slowdowns can occur. So it depends in terms of the capacity, in terms of the RAM that you have. So you can just check on your task manager and check in terms of the application that you uses. Sometimes you may find that your laptop is slow because of such things. Also, the slowdown, computers are supposed to perform process faster and better, which makes the occasional bout of slowdown more pronounced. So video out of sync with audio, longer than normal, load times, and stuttering mouse movement all indicate either a fragmented hard drive or an overtaxed CPU. So there's types of issues that can relate to whenever a certain maybe a peripheral is being slow or so forth. And such issues can be, how can we determine that is when the video is out of sync with audio, the hard drive or overtakes CPU, your mouse is stuttering, those kind of things can, fault or can refer to your laptop is slow, the process, those kind of software crashes, those sort of things, those sort of issues. Also looking at the failing power supply, so a computer that suddenly shuts off or has difficulty starting up could have a failing power supply. So without sufficient power, a computer will not operate. And also overheating, computer components generate heat during operation. If the case lacks a sufficient cooling and ventilation setup, the computer parts could burn themselves out. So under rare circumstances, when the electrical system is damaged, the computer could become a fire hazard. So this is the type of overheating and possible problems that can occur during overheating. And also bad hard drive sectors. Over the course of a hard drive's life, parts of the hard drive begin to fail. Mechanical problems are possible, but the hidden threats are bad sectors. Data stored in bad sectors can become corrupted and can cause problems with data and setting throughout the computer. Also, you've got the rootkit. This is a security threat. So a rootkit gives a remote user complete control of a victim computer. So the computer bearing a rootkit often becomes a tool to attack other computers, or at the worst implicates the unwitting user in the crimes of someone else. So that's it in terms of session one. What I've covered in terms of session one, I've covered. Let's go back to the outcomes for session one. I've covered in terms of defining the problem, where I've defined, given an example in terms of how can we go about in terms of defining the problem, and also identifying the problem type. What type of problem can be identified as, in terms of the problem being defined. So whether is it a software problem or a hardware problem, and also we need to make sure in terms of the facts we have collected which meets the problem, investigating further, in terms of the problem type that we have managed to discover, and also what can we do, or what can we determine in terms of the action that needs to be taken. So I've covered all these factors, all these elements, and I've managed to provide example in terms of how can we go about in terms of defining, identifying the problem type, collecting information based on the problem given, and also taking the possible actions that was based on the problem given or defining. So that's it in terms of session one. Let's move on to session two. Session two. The title for session two: need to investigate computer user problems. So how to troubleshoot, this is the most important stage in terms of solving the problem. So in this instance, we need to have a an algorithm that's more or less a troubleshoot mitigating step. So how to troubleshoot a computer problem. So in this instance, what are the steps do you go through in order to diagnose a computer problem? So in most instances, you find that you encounter a problem, and now you come up with an algorithm, a step-by-step solution where we can just go through that solution in order for us to solve the problem. So we all have our methods to identify and correct computer problems. So most of us probably have certain things we go through or steps we follow and so forth. So different environments, applications, and countless other circumstances will influence any troubleshooting methods. So your particular circumstance might dictate something or otherwise. So it depends in based on the environment or application, based on the problem that you have encountered. So the troubleshooting steps will differ. It won't be the same steps that you need to go through. Also, we have what we call the user support problems, usually fall into one of the following categories. We've got hardware failure, software failure, and user created problem. So for hardware failure, this could actually be a failed component, a bad motherboard, a hard drive, for example, or it could be a matter of an unplugged cable, a router or modem that needs to be recycled, or some other such a thing. So mostly for hardware failures, there are software applications that monitor these kind of hardware failures. So it'll this dashboard application would give us a a clear indication in terms of the lifespan of hardware it has, and also how can, if maybe there's issues within that hardware, it will provide details pertaining to that. And also we have software issues. This would include the operating systems, something affected by Windows Update, an application update, or an actual software bug. Like for instance, 2 days ago, I had this issue whenever there's this outlet, PEP, outlet PEP. Normally, I during difficult times, I would send money to my relatives that are far away, far away kilometers from where I live. So I would utilize PEP, for instance. So the past 2 days, I managed to, normally the process in terms of how you go about in terms of sending money. There is a system in place for PEP where you can send money from someone who's located miles away from where you live. So now, whenever I try to, whenever they try to scan my ID, the system would detect, would display another person details, but utilizing my ID. So I picked it up on myself that now the problem is not my ID, it's within the PEP system. I thought maybe that particular PEP system is the problem. So what I did, I went to another outlet for PEP, and also it detected the same problem. So when I further investigated further, I went over to Home Affairs to check maybe where, maybe there's a fraud that has happened, and it discovered that it's actually the PEP system. So I was correct initially to say there was a software bug within the application of PEP. So every time when they try to scan my ID, it would display another person's ID. So itself, they need to debug the system, the application, and that's where they'll fix. So in most cases, you may find such things, where, for instance, your operating system, it requires an update, and every time whenever you switch, whenever you are in you utilizing your laptop, there are certain software that they are not functioning, or your software, your operating system is malfunctioning. Those are the kind of things that you may encounter. And also the user created problem, so they are usually of the unintentional variety, where a user might inadvertently disable something, change something, delete something, and so forth. In most cases, what I've exposed to was people that at most instances they might not understand certain, application. I remember one of my siblings deleting the sound drives, and now he couldn't understand certain things. He encountered an issue, so for the solution that he came about was deleting those sound drives. So now, whilst he wants to watch a movie, there was no sound. So those are the certain things that you may encounter, where client may, disable something, or change or delete something, issues, or change settings within the OS. So those are, they fall under the user created problems. And also we've got the training or documentation. So oftentimes there is a real problem for lack of knowledge or understanding about something. In these cases, it might be that training is needed or documentation needs to be updated. So this is more or less where we have, training within the team, where we train people to utilize a certain application, and also the outside vendor issue. A custom software application or supported piece of hardware might be experiencing issues. So in this instance, you might find that the organization bought a certain application, or a printer, for instance, and usually that printer is being, whenever the printer encounters issues, we normally log a call to the guys who manufactured the printer. So in this instance, it's your outside vendor issues. They come on the premises, and fix the issue. So there are certain details or certain contact lists that you need to follow, or adhere the process, where you log a call and they'll come and fix such issues. And also on the next slide, we've got possible steps to seek solutions. So also we've got the reboot. So requiring a reboot might really be a symptom of a deeper underlying problem. So rebooting once and being done with it's one thing, but it becomes necessary to repeat too frequently to fix the same problem. Then digging a little deeper to find the underlying problem would be required. So rebooting, it's in a case where, for instance, you have managed to update a Windows Windows updates, and it requires you to update in order for them to the updates to function. And also maybe you've managed to fix or update a certain driver and it requires you to update. So rebooting helps when you made some changes on your BIOS and it will require you to update. But sometimes whenever there's issues, maybe your computer is slow, we would resort to rebooting so that maybe there are certain applications that are running concurrently. Maybe that's why the computer might be slow. So rebooting might assist in terms of the making the system since we are restarting it. And also replicate the problem or issue. You need to make the problem happen again. So see the error message, experience the problem yourself to get a better feel. So in this instance, that's where maybe you have encountered an issue, so you want to understand further. That's where you replicate the problem. So I would advise, if maybe your client have requested, have logged in a call to assist you with a certain issue or problem, once you've managed to solve, when you replicate, do not replicate on this on the client's maybe laptop. Maybe replicate on your own laptop or a testing environment where you can easily do within your spare time. It's much more easier because now the issues or problems that you may encounter when you're replicating on the client, it might, the solution that you think it might work, it might not work. So it would need you to come up with another solution in order for you, and that would take time. So it's best to replicate on maybe a testing environment or your own a laptop in order for you to record the process. And also you need to retrace user steps that lead up to the problem. Also, what did the user do immediately leading up to the problem, what was changed and what was installed. So it's good to document these changes every time when a logger when a user logs a call. It's good for you to document everything, every steps that you have from the call up until the problem has been solved. And also the possible steps to seek a solution. We've got the device manager. So a device manager, before let's go through this is such a quick and easy way to get an overview of the hardware status. So a quick look for the yellow or red warning tags might quickly identify the source of the problem. So it's just an overview of the status of a hardware status. So let's look at the device manager. So in this instance, it gives us an overview in terms of the audios. For instance, if maybe the audios the device it's utilizing, if maybe there's any issues in terms of updating the driver, the properties, there's so much, it gives us an overview of hardware status. And also we've got the error logs. The error logs, like the device manager, the error logs might reveal several sources and frequency of the problem. So in this instance, it gives us a detail in terms of what has transpired, what could have been the issue. In fact, this doesn't give us. There is. Let's check. So in this instance, let's look at the event viewer. So an event viewer will give us the possible events that have transpired within the within your PC or your laptop, and will give us a thorough a thorough so a thorough detail in terms of what could be the problem. For instance, let's look at the system. So for system, it tells you the error in terms of the warning, what could have transpired. A corrected hardware error has occurred. The component is your PCI Express and the root port, and it tells you the detail in full, what could be the problem and so forth. So these are your error events, your error logs. It assists us in terms of giving us a detailed uh, depiction of what could have happened and why, whether is it the system, a software, and so forth. And also isolating the problem. Is it a unique, this is the unique this is it the unique to this one computer, or are more people experiencing the same issue? So in this instance, isolating the problem, this is where you isolate the problem to say, maybe for instance, a certain user is experiencing issues with his network, for instance, and he cannot access network. So in this instance, you need to isolate, whether you need to test in terms of within that department, is it one user that is experiencing the issue of not accessing the network, or other the whole department not being able to access. So this is more of isolating the problem. So, for example, is it the only one computer that can print versus all of them that can print? So this is much more similar, isolating, checking if maybe the entire people within that certain department can access the internet or not. And also, you need to seek obvious solutions. Unplugged cords and cables are often the cause of a problem or failure. So sometimes the most simple and obvious solution is the hardest to see. This is true. Easiest solutions, people often tend to ignore them. They look out for the most difficult solutions, or difficult solution, if I may put it that way. So in most instances, we need to seek obvious solutions. Those are the ones that can assist us and to solve the problem. That's it in terms of session 2. And for session 2, we have covered in terms of investigating the user problems, how to go about in terms of the troubleshooting steps, the uh, computer issues that we often find in terms of the hardware failure and the software issues, the user created problem, and so forth. So let's move on to the session 3, implementing solution to computer user problems. So on slide 21, before you implement a solution, you have to access several options that you can use to resolve the problem. So you first learn how to monitor your solution to make sure it is effective, and after that you need to learn how to make sure that your solution, everybody who needs to be involved in solving the problem. So on to the next slide. You need to ensure that solutions are effective, and also what makes a solution effective. To be effective, a solution needs to solve the problem properly. How can you make sure that a solution to a problem is effective? So how to go about in terms of making, a solution is to solve a problem. We need to, review and modify solutions. So once you have followed up the solution that you have implemented, you need to review and modify it. So remember, so now since we have managed to come up with a solution based on the problem that we have encountered, we need to review in terms of how the mitigating step, the troubleshooting steps that we have. How can we go about in terms of implementing it? Remember, on session 1, I've covered in terms of we need to brainstorm the ideas in terms of before we take an action, we need to brainstorm to say, if I take off, maybe if it's hardware related or software related. For hardware related, these are the steps in terms of brainstorming. But for software steps, this is the steps that we need to do. So for implementation, we need to go back to review those steps, those mitigating steps that we've come up with. So we need to follow up the solution that we have implemented. You need to review and modify it. So once the mitigating steps that we have managed to come up with, we need to, review it. If there are any changes to it, maybe we need to add, we will have to, modify. And also, you need to standardize some of the practices regarding the solution. and also on the reviewing and modifying solution, how to review a solution. So when you review a solution, you need to evaluate or analyze it. You examine it carefully to see whether you need to make any changes to the solution you have implemented. And how to modify a solution. Once you have reviewed your solution, you know it is working as well as you expected it to work, but what you find that your solution is not working as well as you expected it to work. In this case, you need to change or modify your solution so that it does work as well as you expected it to work. So in these two solutions, in terms of modifying it, it assists you in terms of maybe the step or the solution that you've come up, the first step that you've come up, whether it's not working. It assists us to go back and modify and add changes if maybe there are any steps that we need to include on on the solution that you have provided. And also how to standardize a solution. When you standardize a solution to a problem, you are saying this way of solving a problem works the best, so I'm going to use it to solve all problems of the step. But it depends, remember, based on the environments and organizations, it will depend. So you cannot sub in certain instances, in certain problems, you can standardize a solution to a problem, but it do depend on the problem. So you have based on the problem and the level of the problem that you find, whether is it high, low, or medium. Often medium issues that you might encounter. Normally, that's where you can standardize those kind of problems. Uh, but it will depend. It will vary based on the problem type and also the organization that you are in. So that's it in terms of session 3. Let's move on to session 4. Closed resolves computer user problems. For closed resolve problems, reporting a resolution. So what do they mean when they say that the computer problem has been resolved? What is a resolution? To resolve something is to find a satisfactory way of dealing with a problem. So a resolution is a kind of solution that closes a problem. So this is very important. So a resolution is a kind of solution that closes a problem. So to report the resolution of a computer problem to a user, you would tell the user exactly what you did to repair the computer. So you would mention which parts you replaced and which parts you required or serviced. In particular, you would mention how what you did to the computer has solved the problem. Also, recording a solution to organization standards and procedure. The way that you record how you fixed a computer problem differs from company to company. The company that you work for probably has its own methods and documents that it wants you to use for recording the solution to the problems. And also, the records, in general, the records should show the following important factors. Remember, in terms of what are the resolution to the problems, so you need to have a record. So that record consists what the original problem was, an explanation of the symptoms of the problem, when the user first told you about the problem, an outline of all the steps you took to troubleshoot the problem, and whether you could fix the problem or whether you forwarded it to the technical support. So it depends. So this, it's a record that should include whenever a resolution has been outlaid in terms of the problem given. So these are the steps that needs to go about in terms of, this is just an example where a user tries to print and he encountered the problem. So a service text logs the new incident. The incident goes according to the stages that an organization has managed to come about with. So that's it in terms of session 4, and how how to report a resolution. Remember, a resolution is a kind of solution that closes a problem. So in this instance, we want to close a problem. So we'll have to come up with a document in this instance where it has factors such as what the original problem was, explaining the symptoms of the problem, when the user first told you, depends whether you're a technician or help desk personnel. Also, it will outline and all the steps you have taken in terms of troubleshooting the problem, whether you could fix the problem or whether you forwarded it to the technical support. So those are the document that most organization would include in terms of going about, in terms of closing the problem. So moving on to the last session. Okay, before going through the last session, I would like you to go through the problem solving techniques through page 27 to 26 to 27 in your learner guide. So this would outline the techniques in order for you to solve the problems. And moving on to the last session, forward unresolved computer user problems to appropriate area. So unresolved problems and support agreements. So users with support agreements are unhappy when you tell them that you cannot fix their computers in the time stated in their support agreements. This is especially true of users who have spent money on warranties to make sure that their problems are fixed and very quickly. If you cannot fix a user's computer within the time frame of the support agreement, try to give the user computer to use while an expert is looking at his computer. So in session 5, it's more of unresolved problem and support agreement. So in this instance, that's where we find issues where we've got unresolved problems, issues that can, like for instance, you may find maybe that your computer has an issue with a certain component, or laptop is having issues with your hard drive, and these hard drive are manufactured in Netherlands, for instance. So, for instance, these hardwares, the company that is responsible in terms of fixing your laptops would take time in order for them to order these components. So in this instance, that's where you can find another alternative plan to say, okay, since this issue might take about 3 months, we may offer you a laptop for you to use. So in most instances, organizations have agreements in place where they have with their vendors, or where they have agreements with people that they normally have business with, your third party, where they fix their laptop. So in this instance, they provide agreement to say if there's any issues or components that would take more than 3 months, this other option will provide maybe a new laptop that for use maybe for 3 months, until maybe we fix the issue. Or if the issue, it would take longer, we would offer maybe a new laptop. So the session 5, it's more of giving us details in terms of unresolved problems. So that's it in terms of this unit standard. Let's quickly go through the formative and summative assessment for this unit standard. Okay, so now let's look at the formative assessment in your learner workbook. For activity 1, what are the parameters of a problem? That's for activity 1. And for activity 2, once you have collected information about the problem, what is the next step in the process of solving the problem? That's for activity 2. And for activity 3, you need to define the process of determining a course of action. That's for activity 3. And also for activity 4, you need to define any 3 common computer problems. That's for activity 4. And for session 2, activity 6, you need to define the following user problems: hardware failure, software issue, and user created problem. Activity 7 for session 3, you need to explain how to review a solution. And activity 8, why is it important to consult stakeholders? And activity 9, why is it useful to standardize a solution? And activity 10 for session 4, you need to outline the general factors that are contained in a record. Activity 11, you need to list the techniques of solving problems. That's for activity 11. And activity 12 for session 5, you need to discuss and resolve computer problems and support agreements. And that's it in terms of your formative assessment. Let's move on to the summative assessment. For activity 1, you need to name 3 attributes that define a problem. And activity 2, what do you think it is important to identify the type of problem when you define a problem? Activity 3, what is it required before you attempt to solve a problem? And activity 4, you need to draw up a step of the conceptual model to solve a problem. Activity 5, with the help of a diagram, illustrate the third step of solving a problem. Activity 6, you need to outline the types of computer problems that require troubleshooting. And then activity 7, name and define 3 possible solutions the above mentioned computer problem. So that's for activity 7. You need to name and define 3 possible solutions mentioned in between computer problems. Activity 8, you need to briefly discuss how to trade and monitor solutions for effectiveness. Activity 9, why is it useful to standardize a solution? And activity 10, what is the procedure to report a computer problem? And activity 11, how would you handle unresolved computer problems? And that's it in terms of your summative assessment for this unit standard. So that's it. Please go through your learner guide, and if you have watched the video, you'll be able to attempt all the activities from your learner workbook and also the activities on your summative assessment. That's it. Thank you. I'll see you in the next video.